The autumn rain tapped gently against the window of Mike Wilson's downtown Chicago office. He smiled at the photo on his desk, Sarah and him at their wedding, both beaming with joy. 7 years had passed since that perfect October day, yet the memory felt as fresh as yesterday. Mike leaned back in his chair, running his fingers through his dark brown hair, contemplating the dinner reservations he'd made for their anniversary next week. Sarah would love the new French bistro in Lincoln Park. She was always up for trying trendy restaurants. That's what he loved about her. Her enthusiasm for life, her adventurous spirit. College sweethearts turned power couple. They'd built a comfortable life together in their Lakeview apartment. Mike's career as a software developer at a prestigious tech firm had taken off. Sarah had climbed the corporate ladder to become a marketing executive at a major advertising agency. They were living the dream, or at least that's what their friends always said. Mike glanced at his phone, no messages from Sarah yet. She was probably still at the gym, Elite Fitness, that upscale place she'd joined 6 months ago. It had everything: state-of-the-art equipment, spa facilities, personal trainers. Sarah had always been health conscious, but lately, her dedication to fitness had reached new heights. She'd wake up at 5 a.m. for morning sessions, then head back after work for evening classes. Mike had to admit, the results were impressive. Sarah had always been beautiful, but now she practically glowed with vitality. Her honey blonde hair seemed shinier, her green eyes brighter, her smile more radiant than ever. Yet something felt different, a subtle shift he couldn't quite put his finger on. The changes had started gradually, almost imperceptibly. First, it was the extended gym sessions that stretched later and later into the evening. Then came the constant checking of her phone, smiling at messages she never shared. Their Netflix and pizza Friday nights became a thing of the past. Sarah was always too tired, or had early morning training sessions to prepare for. Mike tried to be supportive. He really did. He'd even visited the gym a few times, attempting to share in her newfound passion. That's when he first met Jake Martinez, Sarah's personal trainer. Jake was everything Mike wasn't: tall, muscular, with the kind of confidence that commanded attention. He had a way of making everyone feel like they were the most important person in the room. Sarah's making incredible progress, Jake had said, flashing his perfect white smile. You should be proud of her dedication. Mike nodded, ignoring the slight discomfort he felt at the way Jake's hand lingered on Sarah's shoulder. It was professional, he told himself, just a trainer encouraging his client. But the doubts began to creep in, small at first, then growing like shadows at dusk. Sarah's gym bag now always included makeup and her favorite perfume. She'd start Ed wearing her designer workout sets, the ones that cost more than Mike's entire casual wardrobe. Their intimate moments became increasingly rare, with Sarah claiming exhaustion from her intense workouts. Dave, Mike's best friend since college, noticed the changes too. Something seems different with Sarah, he mentioned during their weekly beer night at Murphy's Pub. Mike stared into his craft IPA, watching the amber liquid swirl. She's just really into fitness right now, he defended, but the words sounded hollow even to him. The first real red flag came on a rainy Thursday evening. Mike had left work early, planning to surprise Sarah with takeout from her favorite Thai place. When he called to ask if she was heading home from the gym, she said she was stuck at work, finishing a big presentation. Later that night, he saw the gym's location check-in on her Instagram story, time-stamped during her supposed work meeting. When he casually mentioned it the next morning, Sarah brushed it off. "Oh, I went to the gym after finishing at the office," she said, not quite meeting his eyes. "Must have forgotten to post it right away." Mike nodded, pretending to accept the explanation. But something in his gut told him there was more to the story. The lies, once he started noticing them, seemed to multiply like rabbits. Lunch meetings that ran mysteriously long. Weekend training sessions that never appeared on the gym's official schedule. Phone calls that ended abruptly when he entered the room. Text messages that she deleted almost immediately after reading. Mike tried to rationalize it all. Sarah was dedicated to her fitness goals. That was a good thing, right? She was taking care of herself, looking better than ever. If she sometimes bent the truth about her schedule, well, maybe she just needed some space. Everyone said marriage required trust and independence. But then came the night that changed everything. Mike had been working late, coding a crucial update for a client system. Around 9 p.m., Sarah's contact photo flashed on his phone. "Hey babe, don't wait up," she said, her voice slightly breathless. The team decided to grab drinks after work to celebrate landing the new account. Something in her voice sounded off. Maybe it was the slight echo, like she was in a tiled room. Or maybe it was the faint sound of music in the background, not the usual ambient noise of a downtown bar. Mike found himself opening the Elite Fitness app, the one Sarah had insisted he download to stay connected. His heart dropped when he saw it. Sarah's profile showed she was currently checked in, not at a bar with colleagues, but at the gym that was supposed to be closed for the night. Mike sat at his desk, staring at his computer screen, but seeing nothing. His hands hovered over the keyboard, fingers trembling slightly. The rational part of his brain tried to come up with explanations. Maybe she went to the gym first, and then met her Kalia. Maybe she forgot to check out when she left. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation for all of this. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The careful facade of their perfect life seemed to be cracking. All the little inconsistencies, the subtle changes in Sarah's behavior, suddenly came into sharp focus. Like pieces of a puzzle he hadn't wanted to solve, they were forming a picture he couldn't ignore. Mike grabbed his keys and coat, his heart pounding against his ribs. The drive to Elite Fitness felt both eternally long and impossibly short. The parking lot was mostly empty, but he recognized Sarah's white Tesla, parked in a dark corner away from the streetlights. Next to it stood a black Jeep Wrangler he'd seen before, Jake's car. The gym's front entrance was locked, the lobby dark, but a faint light spilled from the frosted windows of the upper level. Mike's access card still worked. Sarah had added him as a family member months ago. The click of the door opening sounded impossibly loud in the quiet night. His footsteps echoed in the empty gym as he climbed the stairs. The sound of low music grew stronger. His phone buzzed, another message from Sarah. "Having a great time with the team? Don't worry about picking me up." Mike's hand tightened around his phone. He reached the top of the stairs, following the soft glow coming from the spa area. The music was clearer now, something slow and jazzy. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear his pulse in his ears. As he rounded the corner, he heard voices. Soft laughter, the unmistakable sound of Sarah's giggle, the one he used to love so much. Then a deeper voice, male, saying something too low to make out. More laughter. Mike stood frozen, his feet refusing to move. He didn't want to take those final steps, didn't want to see what he knew he would find. But his body moved forward anyway, drawn by some masochistic need to know the truth. The spa area was dimly lit, steam rising from the hot tub. 2 champagne glasses sat on the edge, half empty. And there they were, Sarah and Jake, wrapped in white towels, sitting impossibly close. Jake's hand was on Sarah's thigh, and she was leaning into him, her wet hair falling around her shoulders. Time seemed to stop. The music faded to a dull buzz in Mike's ears. He watched, feeling strangely detached, as Sarah's eyes met his. Her smile froze, then melted into an expression of horror. She jumped away from Jake as if burned, but it was too late. The damage was done. "Mike!" Sarah's voice was high-pitched, panicked. "What are you?" "I can explain." Jake stood up, maintaining more composure than Sarah, but his face had lost its usual confident smirk. "Man, this isn't what it looks like," he started, but Mike cut him off with a raised hand. "Save it." Mike's voice was eerily calm, surprising even himself. "Don't insult my intelligence." He turned to Sarah, who was clutching her towel. "I can shield. I guess the team drinks got moved to the spa. The sarcasm in his voice made her flinch. Mike, please. Sarah's eyes were filling with tears. We can talk about this. But Mike was already turning away, his feet carrying him back toward the stairs. He could hear Sarah calling after him, her voice echoing off the tiled walls. He kept walking. In his car, Mike sat with his hands gripping the steering wheel. His knuckles were white, but he couldn't seem to loosen his grip. The image of Sarah and Jake played on repeat in his mind like a horrible movie he couldn't turn off. His phone was buzzing continuously, Sarah's name flashing on the screen over and over. He finally started the car, his movements mechanical. The Chicago skyline blurred through his windshield, or maybe it was just his eyes. He found himself driving to Dave's apartment in Wicker Park. His friend took one look at his face and wordlessly grabbed 2 beers from the fridge. Want to talk about it? Dave asked after Mike had drained half his bottle. Mike stared at the label, picking at its edge with his thumbnail. I found Sarah at the gym with Jake, he said finally, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. In the spa. After hours. Dave cursed softly, setting down his beer. I'm so sorry, man. The simple words of sympathy nearly broke Mike's composure. He took another long drink, trying to swallow the lump in his throat. His phone buzzed again, another message from Sarah. Please come home. We need to talk. I can explain everything. Mike turned off his phone, letting it clatter onto Dave's coffee table. The night stretched ahead, long and dark, full of questions he wasn't ready to answer. Mike woke up on Dave's couch with a pounding headache and a mouth that tasted like stale beer. Sunlight streamed through the windows, harsh and unforgiving. For a blissful moment, he couldn't remember why he was there. Then the memories of last night came crashing back like a tidal wave. His phone had died sometime during the night. When he plugged it in, the screen lit up with a flood of notifications. 15 missed calls from Sarah, 27 text messages, 3 voicemails. Dave emerged from his bedroom, looking as rough as Mike felt. Coffee, he asked, already moving toward the kitchen. Mike nodded, scrolling through Sarah's messages without really reading them. They all blurred together. Pleased to talk, promises to explain, declarations of love and remorse. What are you going to do? Dave asked, setting a steaming mug in front of Mike. The coffee was black and strong, just like Mike needed it. I have no fucking idea, Mike admitted, running a hand over his face. His wedding ring caught the morning light, a cruel reminder of promises broken. His phone buzzed again, another message from Sarah. I'm at home. Please come back. We need to talk. Mike stared at the words until they lost all meaning. Part of him wanted to throw the phone against the wall. Another part wanted to rush home and pretend last night never happened. You have to face it sometime, Dave said gently, reading Mike's expression. Whatever you decide to do, you can't hide out here forever. Mike knew his friend was right, but that didn't make it any easier. He finished his coffee, borrowed a clean shirt from Dave, and headed out to face reality. The drive home felt surreal. Chicago traffic moved around him in its usual chaotic dance, but Mike felt disconnected from it all. How could the world just go on like nothing had changed? How could people just drive to work and walk their dogs when his entire life had imploded? Sarah's Tesla was in its usual spot when he pulled into their building's garage. Mike sat in his car for a long moment, gathering his courage. The elevator ride to their floor seemed to take forever and no time at all. His key turned in the lock with a familiar click. Sarah was sitting on their living room couch, still wearing yesterday's clothes. Her makeup was smeared, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She jumped up when Mike entered, taking a step toward him before stopping herself. Mike, she whispered, his name a prayer on her lips. Talk, Mike said, remaining by the door. He couldn't bring himself to move closer. Couldn't trust himself to maintain his composure if he did. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, looking small and lost. I'm so sorry, she began, her voice trembling. I never meant for any of this to happen. Mike let out a harsh laugh. What exactly didn't you mean to happen, Sarah? Didn't mean to lie? Didn't mean to cheat? Or just didn't mean to get caught? Sarah flinched at his words, tears spilling down her cheeks. It started so innocently, she said, sinking back onto the couch. Jake was just my trainer at first. He made me feel good about myself, motivated. She wiped at her tears with shaking hands. When did it change? Mike's voice was cold, detached. He needed to know, even though each word felt like a knife in his chest. Sarah stared at her hands, twisting her wedding ring. About 3 months ago, after that charity gala. Mike remembered that night. Sarah had worn a red dress that made heads turn. Jake had been there too, invited by one of the gym's wealthy clients. We danced, Sarah continued softly. Just one dance. But something changed after that. And then what? Mike pressed, even though he didn't want to hear it. Sarah's voice was barely audible. We started texting more, meeting early for training sessions. She looked up at Mike, pleading. I tried to stop it, I did. But you didn't, Mike finished for her. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with accusation. Sarah's silence was answer enough. Mike felt something inside him crack and splinter. How many times? He asked, needing to know the full extent of her betrayal. Sarah's face crumpled. Mike, please. How? Many times. Each word was carved in ice. 6 or 7, she whispered, and Mike felt the number like a physical blow. Not just a one-time mistake. Not just a moment of weakness. 6 or 7 deliberate choices to betray him. And last night, he pressed masochistically. Sarah's silence stretched for a long moment. It wasn't supposed to happen, she finally said. We were just talking, and then… Stop. Mike cut her off. He couldn't bear to hear more. His hands were shaking, and he shoved them into his pockets. I can't do this right now. Where are you going? Sarah asked as he turned toward the door. Her voice was small, frightened. I don't know, Mike answered honestly, but I can't stay here. Please don't leave, Sarah begged, rising from the couch. We can fix this. We can go to counseling, work through it. Mike paused with his hand on the doorknob. Can we? He asked, not turning around. Can we really? He left before she could answer, her sobs following him down the hallway. In his car, Mike pulled out his phone and called his boss. Family emergency, he said shortly. I need a few days. He drove aimlessly through the city, watching the neighborhoods change around him. The gleaming towers of downtown gave way to the brownstones of Lincoln Park. The trendy boutiques of Wicker Park blurred past his windows. Finally, he found himself at Montrose Harbor, staring out at Lake Michigan. The lake was choppy, white-capped waves crashing against the breakwater. Mike sat on a bench, letting the cold wind whip around him. 7 years of marriage. 12 years together, if you counted college. All destroyed in a matter of months. His phone buzzed, Dave checking in. You okay, man? Mike typed back a quick response. No, but I will be. He thought about Sarah's tears, her pleas for forgiveness. Part of him wanted to believe they could fix this. That love could conquer betrayal. That trust, once shattered, could be rebuilt. But another part of him knew things would never be the same. Every time Sarah was late coming home, he'd wonder. Every text message would spark suspicion. Every business trip would feed his doubts. The sun was setting when Mike finally left the harbor. He checked into a hotel downtown, not ready to face Dave's sympathy or Sarah's tears. The room was generic, impersonal, exactly what he needed. He ordered room service he couldn't taste and turned on TV shows he couldn't focus on. Around midnight, his phone lit up with another message from Sarah. I know you need space, and I understand, but please know that I love you. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Mike stared at the words until they blurred. Love wasn't supposed to hurt like this. The next few days passed in a haze. Mike worked remotely from his hotel room, throwing himself into coding to avoid thinking. Sarah's messages became less frequent, but no less desperate. Dave brought him clean clothes and offered his guest room again. On the fourth day, Mike's phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Mr. Wilson?" A woman's voice asked. "This is Dr. Emily Chun. Your wife asked me to reach out." Mike's hand tightened on the phone. "A marriage counselor?" "Yes." Dr. Chin's voice was gentle but professional. "Sarah has started individual therapy with me, and she hoped you might consider couples counseling." Mike closed his eyes, suddenly exhausted. "I don't know if I'm ready for that." "That's completely understandable," Dr. Chin replied. "But when you are ready, if you're ready, my door is open." She gave him her number before hanging up. Mike saved it, but didn't make an appointment. A week after that night at the gym, Mike finally went home to get more clothes. He timed it for when he knew Sarah would be at work. But she was there, sitting at their kitchen island with a cup of cold coffee. "I took some time off," she explained quietly. "I'm not going back to that gym." Mike nodded stiffly, moving past her toward their bedroom. He could feel her eyes following him, heavy with unspoken words. The bedroom was exactly as he'd left it, but it felt different somehow. Foreign. As he packed a bag, Sarah appeared in the doorway. "I miss you," she said simply. Mike's hand stilled on a folded shirt. "I miss who you used to be," he replied. The truth of it hit them both hard. Can we try?" Sarah asked, her voice breaking. "Dr. Chun thinks we could work through this, if we both commit to it." Mike sat heavily on the bed, their bed. "I don't know if I can trust you again." "I know," Sarah whispered. "I know I destroyed that trust. But please, Mike, please give me a chance to rebuild it." She took a tentative step into the room. "I'll do whatever it takes. Therapy, complete transparency, anything." Mike looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since that night. She'd lost weight, her designer workout clothes hanging loose on her frame. Her face was bare of makeup, showing dark circles under her eyes. She looked as broken as he felt. "I'll think about it," he finally said. It wasn't forgiveness, wasn't even a promise, but it was something. Sarah nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. That night, back in his hotel room, Mike pulled out Dr. Chin's number. He stared at it for a long time, turning possibilities over in his mind. Could they rebuild from this? Should they even try? His finger hovered over the call button as memories flooded his mind. Sarah on their wedding day, radiant in white. Their first apartment together, barely more than a closet. Lazy Sunday mornings and passionate Friday nights. 7 years of love and laughter and dreams. But then other images intruded. Sarah and Jake in the spa. Her deleted messages and secret meetings. 6 or 7 times of conscious betrayal. Trust shattered like a mirror, showing distorted reflections of what used to be. Mike set the phone down without calling. He wasn't ready. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Outside his window, Chicago glittered. In the night, millions of lives moving forward while he stood still. Somewhere out there, Sarah was probably lying awake too. Somewhere, answers waited to be found. But for now, Mike could only sit in the darkness, watching the city lights blur through tears he refused to shed, wondering how something so perfect could go so wrong, and if anything would ever feel right again. 3 weeks after discovering Sarah's affair, Mike finally called Dr. Chin. The decision came after a particularly rough night at Murphy's Pub. Dave had invited him out, trying to lift his spirits. Instead, Mike found himself staring into his fourth beer, realizing he couldn't keep living in limbo. Dr. Chin's office was in a converted brownstone in Lincoln Park. Soft jazz played in the waiting room, and the air smelled of lavender. Sarah was already there when Mike arrived, sitting stiffly on a leather armchair. They hadn't seen each other in 5 days. "Thank you both for coming," Dr. Chin said, ushering them into her office. She was younger than Mike expected, with kind eyes and a calm presence. This is a safe space for both of you to express your feelings honestly. Mike noticed Sarah's hands trembling as she sat on the couch, keeping distance between them. The first session was brutal. Words that had festered for weeks finally found voice. Mike's anger, Sarah's guilt, their shared grief for what was lost. Dr. Chin guided them through it with gentle but firm questions. I feel like I'm drowning, Mike admitted, his voice raw. Every time I close my eyes, I see them together. Sarah's sob caught in her throat. I hate myself for hurting you like this. Week after week, they returned to Dr. Chen's office. Sometimes they made progress. Other times they seemed to move backward. The trust that had been shattered proved harder to rebuild than either had imagined. Sarah kept her promise about transparency. She shared her location, offered passwords to her accounts. She quit her job at the advertising agency, unable to face the colleagues who had covered for her lies. But Mike found that constant surveillance didn't bring peace. Checking her phone every hour isn't trust, Dr. Chin pointed out during one of Mike's individual sessions. It's a prison for both of you. Mike knew she was right, but he couldn't stop himself. The need to know, to verify, had become compulsive. 2 months into therapy, they tried dating again. Small steps, Dr. Chun had advised. They went to a new restaurant in West Loop. Sarah wore a blue dress Mike had always loved. The conversation was stilted, careful. How's the job search going? Mike asked, studying his menu too intently. Sarah talked about some interviews, her voice cautiously optimistic. They avoided certain topics by mutual, unspoken agreement. No mention of gyms or fitness or personal trainers. After dinner, they walked along the river. The city lights reflected off the water, creating dancing patterns. Sarah's hand BR, ushed against Mike's, tentative. He didn't pull away, but he didn't take her hand either. I miss us, Sarah whispered into the night air. Mike watched a water taxi glide past. I miss who we were, he replied. The distinction hung between them, heavy with meaning. Spring came to Chicago, bringing warm breezes and fresh starts. Mike moved back home, but into the guest room. They tried to establish a new normal. Morning coffee, careful conversations, separate lives under one roof. Sarah started a new job at a smaller agency. Mike threw himself into a major project at work. They continued seeing Dr. Chun, together and separately. On the surface, they were trying to make it work, but something had changed fundamentally. The easy intimacy they once shared was gone. Every touch felt weighted with history. Every late night at work sparked old anxieties. One Sunday morning, Mike found Sarah crying in the kitchen. She was clutching an old photo album, pictures from their college days scattered across the counter. We were so happy, she said, touching a photo of them at a football game. So innocent. Mike sat beside her, looking at their younger selves. Sarah in his college sweatshirt, him with longer hair and fewer worries. The weight of everything that had changed pressed down on him. We can't go back, he said softly. Sarah's tears fell faster. I know, she whispered. I just wish. She didn't finish the thought. She didn't need to. The breaking point came unexpectedly. A routine evening, nothing special. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text. Mike felt his whole body tense, the familiar surge of suspicion rising. It's just Amy from work, Sarah said quickly, showing him the screen. The fact that she still had to explain, still had to prove. The fact that he still needed her to. Something clicked into place. We can't live like this, Mike said, his voice tired. Sarah set down her phone, understanding dawning in her eyes. No, she agreed quietly. We can't. They sat in silence for a long moment. The sound of city traffic drifted up from the street below. A siren wailed in the distance. Life going on around them while their world shifted again. I love you, Sarah said, her voice breaking. I love you too, Mike replied, and meant it. But they both knew now that sometimes love wasn't enough. Some breaks couldn't be mended. They told Dr. Chun at their next session. She didn't seem surprised. Sometimes the healthiest choice is knowing when to let go, she said gently. It doesn't mean you failed. The logistics of separation were surprisingly simple. Sarah found an apartment in Wicker Park. Mike kept their place in Lakeview. They divided their lives with careful precision. 7 years of marriage reduced to lists of possessions. The day Sarah moved out was surreal. Movers carried boxes and furniture while neighbors pretended not to watch. Their art collection split evenly. Their shared books divided by preference. The last thing Sarah packed was their wedding album. She held it uncertainly, looking at Mike. You should keep it, he said. Neither of them will want to look at it anyway. Standing in their half-empty apartment, Sarah turned to Mike. I really am sorry, she said. For everything. Mike nodded, throat tight. I know. She hugged him before she left. It felt different from their earlier embraces. An ending rather than a promise. A goodbye rather than a pause. The first few weeks alone were the hardest. Mike rattled around the apartment, haunted by empty spaces. Sarah's coffee mug still in the cabinet. Her favorite blanket still draped over the couch. Dave dragged him out regularly, refusing to let him wallow. You need to start living again, his friend insisted. So Mike did, one day at a time. He joined a rock climbing gym, needing something completely different from elite fitness. Started taking coding classes to advance his career. Had dinner with colleagues he'd neglected during the marriage crisis. Small steps toward a new normal. 3 months after Sarah moved out, Mike ran into her at their old favorite coffee shop. She looked good, more like her old self. They talked awkwardly for a few minutes. She was dating someone new, she admitted. He found he didn't feel much of anything about that. Summer came to Chicago, bringing street festivals and baseball games. Mike spent weekends exploring parts of the city he'd forgotten about. He took a photography class at the Cultural Center, started making new memories in old places. At a gallery opening in River North, he met Rachel. She was an artist, showcasing her work. Her smile lit up her whole face. Her passion for her art was contagious. They started slow, both careful with their hearts. Coffee dates turned into dinner dates. Long walks along the lake turned into longer conversations. Rachel hadn't been married before, but she understood broken trust. Everyone has scars, she told him one evening. They were sitting on her tiny balcony, watching the sunset. They're part of who we are. Mike found himself believing her. The divorce papers came on a Tuesday. Mike signed them without hesitation. As he watched the courier leave with the envelope, he felt lighter. Not happy exactly, but free. That weekend, he and Rachel drove up to Michigan for a gallery show. The lake was different on that side, somehow wilder. Standing on the beach, watching the waves, Mike felt possibilities stirring, a future unfolding. Sarah sent him an email after the divorce was final. She thanked him for the good years, apologized again for the bad ones, wished him happiness. Mike read it twice, then closed his laptop. Outside his window, Chicago stretched toward the horizon. The city where he'd fallen in love, had his heart broken, and found himself again. Where he'd learned that endings could also be beginnings. That night, he took Rachel to a new French bistro in Lincoln Park. Not the one he'd planned to. Take Sarah to, all those months ago, a different place, for a different time, a fresh start. Rachel wore a red dress and talked about her latest project. Her eyes sparkled when she described her vision. Mike found himself smiling, really smiling, the kind of smile that reached his eyes. Later, walking along the river, Rachel's hand found his. This time, he held on. The city lights danced on the water, creating new patterns, writing a new story. Mike thought about the journey that had brought him here, the pain that had seemed unbearable, the trust that had been shattered, the healing that had come slowly, then all at once. He thought about Sarah, hoping she'd found her own peace, about Jake, who had become little more than a footnote in their story, about love, and how it could both break and heal, about trust, and how it could be rebuilt, just not always where it had first been broken. Rachel squeezed his hand, bringing him back to the present. "Where did you go just now?" she asked softly. Mike looked at her, this woman who had helped him believe in possibilities again. "Nowhere," he said. "I'm right here." And he was, present in this moment, ready for whatever came next, understanding finally that sometimes things had to break completely before something new could begin. The Chicago night wrapped around them, full of promise. Ahead, the river curved toward the lake. Behind, the skyline reached toward the stars. And Mike Wilson, no longer broken, walked forward into his future. The city hummed with life around them. Boats on the river, cars on the bridges, people on the walkways, all moving forward, just like him, all finding their own ways through the night. Rachel tugged him toward a street musician playing jazz. They danced under the city lights, swaying to the music. And Mike realized that while trust, once shattered, might never be the same, sometimes what grew in its place could be even stronger. The music played on, the river flowed on, and life, with all its pain and joy and possibility, went on.